I didn't know if my son was going to make it to Boston, or if I would. That's how it started me, gripping Arlo's tiny hand, trying not to lose myself in the swirl of chaos around us. The cold air of the airport terminal felt sharp against my skin, but inside, my chest was heavy with a weight that no amount of oxygen could lift. I remember the way his small body felt so fragile, so impossibly small beneath my coat, as if one wrong move could shatter him completely. I was sitting in first class on that flight, holding him close, my heart pounding like a frantic drumbeat in my ears. The soft hum of the plane's engines, the distant murmur of other passengers, it all faded into the background. All I could focus on was Arlo's shallow breathing, the faint beep of the portable oxygen machine, and the hope that this trip to Boston Children's Hospital would save his life. A moment later, I felt a hand gently on my shoulder. I looked up, startled, and found myself face to face with a man who looked like he had stepped out of some glossy magazine, a suit that whispered money and power, a calm but unreadable expression, and eyes that seemed to carry their own kind of quiet grief. "I'm Alistair," he said quietly. "I couldn't help but notice you. You look exhausted." I didn't have the energy to respond, so I just nodded, and somehow, my head found its way to rest on his shoulder. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, something between us had shifted, like an unspoken understanding that we were both carrying invisible burdens. Before that moment, life was a constant balancing act, one that I was desperately losing. I'm Isla Moreno, a single mother from California, and for months, my days revolved entirely around Arlo. Every breath he took was a victory. Every smile, a miracle. Arlo was born with a congenital heart defect. The doctors called it complex and high risk. When they first told me, I remember the sterile hospital room feeling colder than it should have been, the sharp scent of antiseptic burning my nose, and the way my own hands trembled as I clutched his tiny body. California had been home all my life, the place where I worked nights at a diner, the place where I learned to stretch every dollar and every moment into something sustainable. The rhythm of my life was the buzz of the coffee machine, the sizzle of eggs on a griddle, the tired smiles of regular customers who knew my name. But now, every day blurred into one long, exhausting fight for Arlo's survival. I lived in a small apartment above a busy street, the sounds of car horns and distant sirens seeping through thin walls. I remember waking up some mornings to the smell of burnt toast I never got around to finishing, the kitchen light casting a dim glow on empty plates. Most days, I didn't have the luxury of sleep, just stolen moments on the couch while Arlo napped. My phone buzzed, constantly calls from doctors, insurance agents, distant relatives, offering prayers but no solutions. My own mother, thousands of miles away, kept asking if I was eating, if I was resting. But the truth was, there wasn't time for any of that. There was only Arlo. The day I found out about Boston Children's Hospital's clinical trial was the first time I dared to hope. The trial wasn't just a chance, it was the chance. But getting Arlo accepted was going to be its own battle. The bureaucracy was a maze, the paperwork endless, and the waiting list longer than I dared to imagine. That's why, when I boarded the plane to Boston, the knot in my stomach was tighter than ever. I'd done everything on my own so far, but this trip felt different. The stakes were higher. When Alistair sat next to me, I tried to keep my guard up, but exhaustion and fear wore me down. There was something about his quiet presence that didn't feel intrusive. Instead, it felt like the softest kind of company, one you don't ask for but desperately need. I caught a glimpse of the way his hands tightened briefly on the armrest as he glanced at Arlo, then quickly looked away. It was like he saw the same kind of pain I carried, but in a way he never talked about. "Your son," he said gently. "He's very brave." I swallowed hard and nodded, fighting the lump in my throat. I just want him to live. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of whispered conversations and stolen glances. By the time we landed, something fragile and new had formed between us, a bond shaped by loss, hope, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, even strangers can become lifelines. The chaos of Boston Children's Hospital hit me the moment we stepped through the sliding glass doors. The sterile scent of antiseptic was sharper here, cleaner, colder, and the endless hum of nurses and doctors moving through bright, white halls made my head spin. Arlo was bundled in my arms, his small chest rising and falling unevenly beneath the soft blanket I'd wrapped around him. Every step felt like I was carrying the weight of the world. Alistair walked beside me, quiet but steady. The way his gaze moved over the hospital, his eyes narrowed in thought, told me he knew this world far better than I ever would. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "I lost my sister to a heart condition when I was a kid. Violet. She was not much older than Arlo." His words landed softly between us. I hadn't expected him to share something so personal, especially not now. But the look in his eyes, something vulnerable, aching, made me want to believe him. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He shook his head, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "It's why I'm here. to help. The next days became a whirlwind of appointments, consultations, and paperwork. I was drowning until Alistair stepped in like some guardian angel with a corporate suit. He navigated the hospital bureaucracy with a calm certainty that left me breathless. Where I faced walls of no and endless red tape, he found open doors. I watched him make calls, talk to specialists, and leverage his connections to secure Arlo a place in the clinical trial that felt like the only thread between life and death. At one point, he even arranged for us to stay in a nearby apartment affiliated with the hospital. A small mercy that lifted a massive weight off my shoulders. But more than the practical help, there was the quiet comfort of his presence. Sometimes, when the exhaustion pressed too hard, I'd find myself talking to him not about Arlo or the trial, but about the little things I rarely shared. My fear of failing as a mother, the guilt I carried for not being able to give Arlo a normal life, and the loneliness of raising him alone. Alistair listened, not with pity, but with something deeper understanding and respect. He never pushed. He just let me unravel, stitch by fragile stitch. One evening, after a long day of tests and waiting rooms, we sat together on the small couch in the apartment Alistair had arranged for us. Arlo was asleep in my arms, his face peaceful for the first time in days. "I don't know how you do this," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "How you keep it all together." He looked at me then, really looked. "Because I've been where you are. Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away." The room grew quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of my son. And then, unexpectedly, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "Isla, you don't have to do this alone." His words sank deep, but so did my fear. I'd been alone for so long, abandoned by my husband when Arlo was born, battling medical bills, and drowning in the daily struggle. To let someone in now felt like risking everything. Still, something in his gaze made me want to believe. But fear has a way of twisting even the kindest moments. A few days later, as Arlo's surgery date loomed closer, I found myself pulled into a spiral of doubt and old wounds. I caught a glimpse of Alistair speaking with one of the doctors, his voice sharp, demanding. There was something in the way the doctor looked at me afterward, pity mixed with skepticism, that made my heart clench. Was Alistair really on my side? Or was this all some kind of power play I didn't understand? My past whispered lies to me, stories of men who promised help and delivered hurt. I began to pull away, retreating behind a wall I thought would keep me safe. When I confronted him, my voice trembled with everything I'd held back. "Why are you really helping me? What do you want from us?" Alistair's eyes darkened with hurt. "Isla, I'm not here for anything but Arlo. I've been where you are. I lost my sister to this same nightmare." But my fear drowned out his words. "I don't know if I can trust you." And just like that, the fragile bond between us shattered. The night before Arlo's surgery was the hardest I've ever known. I sat by his hospital bed, tracing the faint rise and fall of his chest, feeling the cold silence of the room press down on me. Alistair was there too, but at a distance, respecting my space. Or maybe wounded by my rejection. The truth is, I didn't want anyone else watching. I was scared. Scared that this surgery might not save him. Scared that my fears would come true. When the surgery finally began, I felt like the world stopped. Every minute stretched into an eternity. I clung to the hope Alistair had given me, the chance, the resources, the promise. And then, a moment of crisis, something went wrong. The alarms, the sudden rush of doctors, the flood of emotions crashing over me like a tidal wave. Alistair was there again, his presence unwavering. From the waiting room, he spoke to the surgeons, offered support, and stood as a pillar when I couldn't. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just a stranger or a mysterious benefactor, he was family. When the surgeon finally came out, the weight of the entire hospital seemed to settle on my shoulders. His face was tired but calm, the kind of calm that only comes after a storm. "Arlo's surgery was complicated," he said, "but he's stable. We're hopeful, but the next 48 hours are critical." I nodded, swallowing a lump that felt like it would choke me. I looked over at Alistair. He was standing by the corner, hands clasped tightly, jaw clenched. Despite everything, I felt a surge of gratitude that he was here, that he hadn't given up on us. The following days were a blur of waiting. Every beep from the monitors, every nurse's footsteps in the corridor, sent my heart racing. I'd sit by Arlo's bedside for hours, tracing his small fingers, willing him to fight harder than anyone else could. Alistair was there every day. Sometimes he sat silently in the background. Sometimes he sat beside me, quietly sharing the burden of hope and fear. He never pushed, never demanded anything from me, just presence. One afternoon, after a particularly long night, I found myself breaking down in his arms. The tears I'd held back for weeks poured out, the exhaustion, the fear, the helplessness. He held me close, whispering words I couldn't quite hear but felt deep in my bones. In the quiet moments that followed, something shifted between us. The walls I'd built around my heart started to crumble, brick by brick. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was beginning to live again. But life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? Just when things seemed to settle, a misunderstanding threatened to unravel everything. One evening, I overheard a conversation Alistair speaking with one of the hospital administrators in hushed tones. His voice was firm but frustrated. "I'm just trying to make sure Arlo gets every chance he deserves," he said. But the administrator's response made my blood run cold. "If she's unwilling to cooperate fully, we might have to reconsider her eligibility for the trial." I didn't wait for the full story. My mind filled with every worst-case scenario. What if Alistair was trying to control me? What if his kindness came with strings attached? What if this whole thing was a game I was losing? I confronted him, my voice sharp and trembling with anger. "Are you trying to take Arlo away from me?" Alistair's eyes widened, hurt flashing across his face. "No, Isla. You have to trust me. I'm fighting for you both." But the damage was done. Fear and old wounds had clouded my judgment. I pulled away again, shutting him out just when I needed him most. The surgery recovery was slow, and Arlo had moments that made me think we might lose him. One night, his oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. The panic was a tidal wave crashing over me. Alistair was there in an instant, calm and steady, guiding the medical team, making decisions with a quiet authority I hadn't known he possessed. I watched him not just as a stranger or helper, but as someone who loved my son fiercely, someone who had never stopped believing. When Arlo finally stabilized, I looked at Alistair and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled softly. "We're in this together now." In the weeks that followed, something beautiful happened. We became a team, not just mother and benefactor, but something deeper, something fragile and real. Alistair offered me a job with his company in Boston, a chance to rebuild, not just for Arlo's health, but for our lives. It wasn't a charity. It was an opportunity. A future. I hesitated. The past had taught me to be wary. But looking at Arlo, his smiles growing stronger every day, I knew this was a lifeline I had to grasp. We started to build something new, an unexpected family formed not by blood, but by trust, healing, and hope. Moving into our new apartment in Boston felt like stepping into a different world. The city buzzed with possibility. The crisp winter air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors, and the distant clang of the tea train was a steady rhythm beneath it all. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe a little easier. Alistair was already established in his life here, but he never made me feel like an outsider. He had a way of blending his power with humility, opening doors without closing them behind him. When I started my job at his company, I was nervous. A single mother from California, suddenly working alongside executives in tailored suits and sleek offices, it was overwhelming. But Alistair's quiet support made all the difference. "Take your time," he told me one morning over coffee. "This is your space now, too." Arlo was thriving. His laughter echoed through the apartment in ways I hadn't heard before. Lighter, freer. The scar on his chest was a reminder of the battle he'd fought, but it was also a symbol of his strength. Every milestone felt like a victory, and every night, when I tucked him in, I whispered a prayer of thanks that he was still here. But healing isn't linear. Old wounds linger in the quiet moments when no one is watching. One afternoon, I caught myself retreating again. The fear that had once ruled me flickered in the back of my mind. What if this all came crashing down? What if I was fooling myself, believing in a future that wasn't meant to be? Alistair noticed. He didn't ask for explanations, but he was there, steady as ever. "I know trust is hard," he said softly one evening as we watched Arlo play with his toys on the floor. "I've had to learn it too. Losing Violet, it left a scar I didn't think would ever heal." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man shaped by grief and resilience, a man who wasn't perfect but was trying, just like me. "Maybe," I whispered, "we're both trying to find a way forward." Our lives began to intertwine in ways I never expected. Weekends filled with hospital visits turned into family dinners where laughter replaced tears. Alistair's reserved nature softened around Arlo's boundless energy, and I saw glimpses of a future where love wasn't just a dream but a reality. But the past still cast its shadow. One night, a misunderstanding fueled by a misread text message and my own insecurities threatened to undo everything we'd built. I accused Alistair of hiding something, of not being honest about his intentions. He stood there, hurt and silent, and for a moment, I thought I had lost him. But love isn't about never stumbling. It's about holding on when the world feels like it's falling apart. We talked, we cried, we fought the ghosts of our past together, and in that raw, painful honesty, we found healing. The day Arlo took his first steps after surgery was the day I truly believed in second chances. Watching him stumble and fall, only to get back up with a grin that lit up the room, I felt a hope so fierce it nearly brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just about his health, it was about life, resilience, and the unexpected family we had created. Alistair looked at me then, his eyes soft and sure. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. I smiled, knowing that the scars we carried, mine, his, Arlo's, were the threads weaving us into something stronger. The days that followed felt like the quiet after a storm. I was learning what it meant to live again, not just survive, but truly breathe in moments of joy and hope. Alistair and I had settled into a rhythm, the kind that grows from shared pain and mutual respect. One afternoon, I sat in the small living room with Arlo asleep on my lap, his breathing steady and peaceful. Alistair was across the room, immersed in work but glancing up every so often to catch our quiet moments. The soft hum of the city outside was a backdrop to something much larger, a feeling that we were finally building something real. But even as life felt more secure, I couldn't shake the memories of the past, the betrayals, the loneliness, the nights spent wondering if I was enough. It was during these moments that the walls I'd built around myself began to crumble again. One evening, Alistair invited me out to dinner, not for business, but just the two of us. The restaurant was warm and dimly lit, the soft clinking of glasses and murmured conversations wrapping around us like a blanket. Over the course of the meal, we talked about everything and nothing. He shared stories of his childhood with Violet, the pain of losing her, and the ways it shaped who he became. I told him about my own fears, the way I'd been abandoned, the weight of trying to be both mother and father for Arlo. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't just scratch the surface but digs deep, the kind that builds bridges between two broken souls. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand in his. "You're stronger than you know, Isla." I squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. But life's complications have a way of sneaking in when you least expect them. A week later, an old friend from California called, a reminder of the life I left behind. The debts unpaid, the promises broken. She needed help. And suddenly, I was pulled back into a world of obligations I thought I'd escaped. Alistair noticed my tension and didn't press, but I could see the worry in his eyes. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I wondered if I could really have it all, the chance to start fresh in Boston. A career, a family with Arlo and Alistair, or if the past would always reach in and pull me back. The next day brought a turning point. At work, I faced a difficult decision, one that challenged my integrity and my hope for the future. A project I was leading was at risk, tangled in office politics and veiled threats. It was a moment where I could choose to fight or walk away. I thought of Arlo, his fragile smile, the chance Alistair had given me, and I chose to fight. With Alistair's quiet backing, I confronted the obstacles head on. It wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to give up, to believe I wasn't cut out for this. But every time, I reminded myself that I was fighting not just for a job, but for the life I wanted to build. In the end, the project succeeded. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was mine. That night, as Alistair and I sat on the couch, the weight of the day lifting between us, he surprised me. "I want you to know," he said softly, "I'm not just offering you a job or a place to stay. I'm offering you a future, one where we build something together." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I looked at him, seeing not just a powerful CEO, but a man who had risked everything to stand beside me and my son. And for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of that future. The following weeks brought a new kind of rhythm to our lives, a delicate balance between work, healing, and the quiet moments where love began to take root. Arlo's laughter became the soundtrack of our days, and even on the hottest mornings, there was a lightness in the air that I hadn't felt in years. Boston was no longer just a city of cold streets and busy hospitals. It was home. But with healing came vulnerability. One afternoon, while watching Arlo chase bubbles in the park, I caught myself watching Alistair. He stood a little apart, hands in pockets, eyes soft as he smiled at my son. There was something hesitant in his stance, as if he was still unsure where he fit in this new family we were forming. I approached him slowly. "You don't have to stand outside," I said gently. He laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "Sometimes, I'm still learning how to be part of something." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. We were both rebuilding, piece by fragile piece. But life's tests don't stop just because you find hope. One evening, a call from California shook me to my core. It was my mother, her voice strained and urgent. My father was sick, worse than I'd expected. The news pulled me back to a past I was trying to move beyond, a world of old wounds and unfinished business. Alistair didn't hesitate. "Go," he said simply. "We'll manage here." His words were a lifeline. But leaving Arlo and Boston behind, even for a short time, was terrifying. I was caught between two worlds, one where I'd fought to survive, and one where I was just beginning to live. The trip home was heavy with memories and regret. My parents' house smelled the same as it always had. Faint traces of lavender and old wood. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge. Even the faded wallpaper brought back a flood of emotions. My father was worse than I'd imagined, frail and distant, his eyes clouded with pain. In those days, I was reminded of why I'd left. The fights, the silence, the weight of expectations. But I was also reminded of the love that had shaped me, the fierce, complicated love of family. When I returned to Boston, Alistair was waiting for me at the airport, his face unreadable but his arms open. We didn't speak much on the drive home, but the silence was comfortable, a shared understanding that some things didn't need words. That night, as Arlo slept peacefully between us, I felt something settle in my chest, a peace I hadn't thought possible. Over time, Alistair and I learned to trust again, to forgive the fears that nearly tore us apart. We built a life stitched together with patience, honesty, and the quiet joy of small moments. Our family wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, moments of doubt, and scars that would never fully fade. But we faced them together. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting the past. It's about carrying it with you light enough not to break you, heavy enough to remind you how far you've come. In those months after the surgery, I watched Arlo grow stronger. Each step he took was a victory not just for him but for all of us. And in that growth, I found a kind of rebirth for myself, a chance to rewrite the story I thought was already written. Alistair and I settled into a quiet routine, filled with late-night talks, whispered dreams, and the small, tender moments of a family learning to love. One evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, I asked him, "Do you ever think about Violet?" He nodded, eyes distant but soft. "Every day. But I've learned that love doesn't end with loss. It just changes form." His words stayed with me long after the night ended. They reminded me that even in grief, there is hope. Even in fear, there is courage. The hospital had become a second home to us, but Boston was truly where we began to heal. At work, I found purpose beyond motherhood. I was building a career, making a difference. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen not just as a single mother fighting to save her child, but as a woman with strength and ambition. Alistair never pressured me, never tried to define me. Instead, he stood beside me as an equal, a partner, a quiet force of support. One afternoon, as I walked hand in hand with Arlo through the park, I felt a lightness that had once seemed impossible. Life was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was also full of promise. And as I looked at Alistair, his smile warm, his eyes full of something like peace, I knew that sometimes love is the greatest healing of all. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes, life doesn't follow the path we imagine. Sometimes, it breaks us in ways we never thought possible. But in those fractures, there is space for something new, a chance to heal, to trust again, and to find unexpected family where we least expect it. I wonder, when faced with fear and uncertainty, how do you choose to hold on? To fight? To forgive? Is it easier to close your heart? Or to let someone in knowing that love can be as fragile as it is powerful? My journey with Arlo and Alistair taught me that healing isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about vulnerability, courage, and the quiet strength in asking for help when you need it most. If you've ever felt alone in your struggle, remember this. No one has to carry their burdens by themselves. Sometimes, the people who appear as strangers are the ones who help us find our way home. Would you have trusted someone like Alistair? Would you have allowed yourself to believe in a future brighter than your past? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your story or your feelings in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please consider subscribing and supporting this channel, because every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.